Welcome to Taiwan Talks, covering the latest global news from a Taiwan perspective. I'm Betty Chen. The United States has recently initiated a new round of arms sales to Taiwan, as announced by the Defense Security Cooperation Agency. The total value of this arms sales is equivalent to approximately $440 million US. This marks the 10th arms sale to Taiwan since President Biden assumed office, as well as the second sale to Taiwan this year. What are the key implications of this development? Joining us today are Arthur Ding, National Chengchi University College of International Affairs Emeritus Professor; Yanping Su, National Chengchi University Department of Political Science Professor; and Stephen Tan, International Policy Advisory Group Managing Director. A very warm welcome to all of you on the show. So let's start with the talks today. So Professor Su, the most recent arms sales came after Secretary Blinken's visit to China. Is there any particular purpose or message that the U.S. is trying to send to Beijing?
In my opinion, I don't think there is anything new about this move. For example, this kind of act only shows the ongoing commitment of the U.S. for defending Taiwan. Well, not necessarily defending, but providing necessary capabilities for Taiwan's national defense. So even though there are some there were some plans about U.S. officials visiting China, and also some kind of ongoing plan for the meetings and also the interactions between these countries. The arms sales are implemented due to the schedule. Well, that is in my opinion. So basically, I don't think that there is a very big signal that the U.S. want to show to China about this arms sale. But the thing is that we still need to pay great attention about what would happen after each arms sale announcement. So that's something that we should keep an eye on.
So Professor Su, you think this is more like business as usual? We just do it according to the schedule. Professor Ding, what's your take on this?
Yes, basically it's to show U.S. commitment to help defend Taiwan. But I would say this is a kind of different practice. Before President Trump era, particularly during the Obama president era, the practice was that they will always wait for so-called good timing to make announcement of any kind of specific arms sales. So they collect so many arms sale items and find a so-called good timing to make announcement, so that Beijing will not, irritate for this kind of announcement. But when entered the President Trump era, under the they adopt a new practice. Whenever they complete the process of any kind of arms sale request from Taiwan, then they will make announcement. So the practice was completely different from Obama era. Let me repeat again. During the Obama era, they just lump together a lot of different items and make announcement at they try to find a good timing so that Beijing will not irritate, Beijing will not protest. But since the President Trump era, U.S. did not ignore, did not care about U.S. China's response anymore. Whenever they complete the whole process, then they make announcement. So in this case, they probably, after Secretary Blinken visit Beijing, then they completed the process and then make announcement. So probably my point is that we probably don't need to exaggerate this kind of any kind of political significance. Yeah.
So nothing really related to timing, right? Stephen, what's your view on this?
Well, I actually agree with you both. I think it's both business as usual, but it's also set up a new norm, not just this time, but for the past couple of years, which is very different from before. Well, the arms sales is basically based on the Taiwan's Relations Act, and as one of the guiding principles of the United States One China policy. Now, but the dynamics is different now. Yeah. The escalation of the tensions and on the Taiwan Strait and the ever-changing, unilaterally changing peace and stability of Taiwan Strait, and also the exercise on the coercive actions for the sort of the gray zone tactics. So in order to balance the dynamics, the escalated and the speedy arms sales, both in terms of the quantity and the quality, in accordance with the Taiwan Relations Act, remains unchanged. But then, of course, because of the dynamic situation, the increasing capacity and the quality and quantity of arms sales seem to follow the same track and norm. On its face, it's very different from before. But I would still argue that it's not a derail on the pre-existing and the current United States policy towards Taiwan and China. So I don't want to just play too much out of it and use it as a comparison set with Secretary Blinken's visit to Beijing. And I think going forward, it will continue to be on that track, and not just that, the speedy delivery of the arms sale after the announcement is also critically important. And then we see some actions and movements, partially from the pressure for the congressmen and senators on the Hill, but also the awareness of the administration, Biden administration, on the recent delay in the delivery of the arms sale. And so putting more together, I think it's a true reflection of China's unilateral change of the status quo, which is the peace and stability of Taiwan Strait, and that is a very natural outcome of this.
Definitely, we'll talk more about that.
Sure.
Going back to the content of the arms sales, Professor Ding, the combined value of the 30mm high explosive incendiary tracer ammunition, multi-purpose ammunition, and training rounds amount to over $330 million. And there's also an additional package valued at $180 million, comprising of wheeled vehicles, weaponry, and maintenance components. So, Professor Ding, could you please help us understand the significance of this batch of arms?
Okay, when we procure something from United States, for instance, a platform, right? Whether it's a jet fighter or a main battle tank or so-called armored personnel carrier, so on and so forth. Just like many of us, when we buy a car, we need to periodically go for the maintenance, go back to the factory for the maintenance. So maintenance means that you need to change some components, spare parts, so on and so forth. So certain portion of this arms sale is for the maintenance, because we will procure a main battle tank, APC, so on and so forth from United States. Then after several years, we need to change the components. Although it's not broken down totally, but the life cycle has been reached, right? So you need to have this kind of components and spare parts for the regular maintenance. As for the ammunition, similar. Now you buy artillery, you buy the tank, then you need ammunition, right? But many of the ammunition, for a long time, they will be totally useless. So you need to buy something new in order to maintain your so-called fighting capability. So basically, the package sale of this arms sale, I would say, is for the maintenance purpose. Actually, it's nothing new. Now, there's no new platform, the new big chunk platform. So the basic is for the maintenance. Yeah.
So thank you for your explanation. These are mainly for maintenance purposes. Yeah. Do you think that these items can fulfill Taiwan's defense needs?
Oh, basically, without this kind of maintenance, how can you, right, fulfill your military operation need, right? So basically, I think this kind of maintenance is important. Just like you drive a car, right? Regularly, you need to go to change oil, so on and so forth, so that your car can continue to be driven, right? So I guess these are to maintain the capability is extremely important.
Just to ensure that we can have the basic needs for these weaponries. Yeah. Thank you. So, Stephen, after the arms sales announcement, China deployed a total of 24 fighter and bomber aircraft near Taiwan's airspace, crossing the Taiwan Strait median line on 11 occasions. What is your assessment of China's military response?
Well, it may not necessarily be the direct response in reaction to the newly announced arms sale, but I think China's continuous pressing, sort of by deploying the sort of the gray zone tactics, is not a news anymore. Going forward, we'll continue to see that. I think has this been escalated? Yes. Is this something new? No. Would this be? Will we be seeing this, going forward continuously? I would say yes. Would this be totally geared towards Taiwan? Maybe or maybe not. So would this enhance the intention of the PLA or the CCP to take over militarily Taiwan? Would this escalate the war risk? Not necessarily, but I think the continuous drills and the exercises by PLA to prove its existence and to continue to practice not just across the Taiwan Strait, but also in the Pacific and the South China Sea seems to be the new norm, and I think we just have to deal with it. And then I think the United States, along with Japan and South Korea and even the Philippines, working hand in hand and side by side with us here in Taiwan, have consistently proved that there's a fight back for PLA's continuous efforts and exercise. So this has been the new norm, as I just pointed out, and the new dynamics. So to a certain extent, that reflect back to the increased and enhanced arms sales based on the Taiwan Relations Act from the United States to Taiwan and the speedy delivery, but then also under the NCWA for the 2023, the more military aids that are in the implementation phase and coming towards Taiwan. And all in all, I think that's consequential because of the Chinese aggression. And then consequentially, we're more unified and we're more prepared, and we need to be prepared, not just psychologically, but more on the defense basis.
Indeed. So, Professor Su, China's Taiwan Affairs Office said in response to the arms sales from the U.S., saying that the U.S. is transforming Taiwan into a power keg. And they say this is not protecting Taiwan, but rather hurting and destroying Taiwan. The language is quite undiplomatic and is actually quite strong. Do you think that this kind of language is different from the previous remarks?
I don't think there's a big difference between this kind of statement and the previous statement. The thing is that, well, what could be the surprise was that if China changed the rhetoric like this, right? So basically, I don't think that there's anything new in the statement. But the thing is that we have to we have to keep in mind that when the Chinese government made such a statement, they are targeting two kinds of audiences. One audience is the international audience, particularly for Taiwan and also the United States and other countries, and the other audience is domestic audience, right? So so this kind of statement or announcement, particularly shows that the Xi Jinping government is still controlling the power pretty well, and they really want to make a very strong stance in the issues of the cross-strait relations. And so the other thing that we also need to pay attention to is that although it is not surprising to see the Chinese government make such a statement, we also need to pay attention to other kinds of threats or pressure made by the Chinese government. For example, there is an increasing trend of cyber attack and also disinformation, warfare, etc. So we also need to pay attention to that kind of aspect.
So indeed, we'll talk about cybersecurity and related issues in the later part. And back to you, Stephen. The Taiwan Affairs Office spokesperson also called upon the U.S. to stop selling arms to Taiwan and, quote, not to go down the wrong and dangerous path. So what is your take on this kind of remarks?
Well, not a surprise. They do what they have to do. But then I think it won't make a difference because, again, as I just pointed out earlier, the arms sales is based on the U.S. domestic law. And the situation changes every change all the time, and then the dynamics different. So the enhancing the quality and the quantity of the arms sales is a true reflection of the dynamics, which has been escalated by PLA, by CCP over the years, over the Taiwan Strait. So the Taiwan's Affairs Office of Beijing, make an announcement and objections and so on and so forth. I don't think there is any significance in that.
Are tensions de-escalating between the U.S. and China? Red spoke earlier to Stephen Nagy, Japan Institute for International Affairs visiting fellow. Let's have a look.
Professor, Secretary of State Blinken recently visited Beijing. Many have said that this has lowered tensions between the U.S. and China, but has it really?
I think that there are really there's good points, bad points, and the reality of the relationship. And in terms of the good points, any dialogue is positive. I think the fact that we saw the secretary speak to his counterpart Wang Yi, as well as speak to Xi Jinping, does demonstrate that both sides see the importance of communication. The bad side, though, is that really, 30 minutes with Xi Jinping, including an interpreter, which means about 15 minutes of substantial discussion, if really means that they didn't have the ability to really, go into the details, at least at the leadership level. The ugly is that there's still in both China and the United States real distrust, deep distrust with each other, and the structural competition between the two states for hegemony over the Indo-Pacific is really deepening. And I think the difference between the hegemony that I'm talking about is that China very much views hegemony through the lens of countries in its neighborhood, as well as territories deferring to Beijing's wishes, where the United States has a more inclusive form of hegemony or benevolent hegemon, in that it works with like-minded countries like Japan, like South Korea, like Australia, like Singapore, like Vietnam in many ways, as well as political entities like Taiwan to build a more rules-based, stable region. And I think that's a fundamental difference in the forms of leadership that these two states will offer.
Going to the elephant in the room, Taiwan, do you feel that these discussions also involve Taiwan?
Well, the United States is continuing to try to send the message to Beijing that it's one China policy. And when I say it's one China policy, I'm saying the United States one China policy, not China's one China policy, hasn't changed. And this is prioritizing peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits based on the mutual understanding that Beijing and Washington have established over the past 40 years. We see that the Biden administration, through Anthony Blinken, again stressing this idea that some kind of Taiwan contingency has global ramifications, not just regional ramifications, and that makes Taiwan a global public good. And what I mean by that is that the United States, Australia, Canada, where I'm from, Japan, South Korea, and other states in the region all have a very deep interest in Taiwan's future, in peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits, the status quo, and ensuring that no forced reunification or unification happens by Beijing. And I think those messages were sent to Secretary of State Anthony Blinken's counterparts, and equally so, I'm sure Beijing sent the message that Taiwan is an inherent part of Chinese territory based on its understanding of history. And this understanding of history is not shared by much of the world, as is the one China policy is interpreted differently by much of part of the world. And I think that we should be very nuanced in terms of how we understand what kind of discussions are being taken place when it comes to Taiwan.
You talked earlier about how the U.S. projects its power differently from China in bringing allies, especially democratic ones, and You talked about Canada, where you're originally from, and Taiwan's closest neighbor is Japan, where you also reside in. How do you feel these democracies can help Taiwan to protect its democracy and from forced what Beijing calls as unification, or what many in Taiwan call as an annexation?
The reality is that if you're going to have economic relations with China, that you have to have a one China policy, and that one China policy is subject to interpretation, but it means that Beijing is the legal representative of China. But at the same time, I think countries like Japan, Canada, Australia, and others, to strengthen Taiwan's democracy and its civil society, need to encourage as many non-state forms of exchanges as possible. This can be student exchanges, university exchanges, exchanges between unions, such as fishery unions. And we've seen Japan and Taiwan, for example, overcome the challenges related to the Senkaku Islands or the Diaoyutai Islands that are voiced in Taiwan by basically letting the fishery unions work together to jointly exploit the resources in and around these territories. So I think that it's really critical that we continue to build those non-state levels of engagement. I'm a real advocate of including Taiwan in the World Health Organization, bringing in Taiwan into the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. I think that there's a place for Taiwan in many other different international organizations because Taiwan, again, provides such an important example of what a Chinese democracy can be in the region and how transparent and fair elections can take place and how a civil society can be an engaging, active part of governance. And I think these are really important examples for all the countries within the region.
We've also seen a strong reaction from the recent arms sales from the US to Taiwan by China. There was some name calling in that as well. How do you feel the US and allies such as Japan, Canada should react in terms of boosting Taiwan's self-defense capabilities?
First, the arms sales are regular, and Beijing knows this. And it's important for the United States to continue to say that this is a regular pattern of behavior that we've engaged in for the past 40 years and has contributed to peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits. Second, what can Japan, Canada, Australia, and other countries do? I think that they should be also voicing the concern that, or the reality that this is something that has not been, this is not something out of the blue. It's something that's been predictable, and that Beijing's reactions are I think, over the top. I think that other countries like Japan and Australia and Canada need to think about how they can encourage and support Taiwanese deterrence capabilities. And here it could be the provision of some technologies, it could be the provision of some military tools, it could be in the form of joint military training, and that could be with the self-defense forces of Japan or otherwise. I do think that there's a place for joint Taiwan Strait transits, where, for example, Canada, Japan, maybe Germany transit the Taiwan Straits to demonstrate that these are international waters. So there's a lot of different formula to build Taiwanese deterrence capabilities so that it can resist a forced reunification. But at the same time, I think that these countries should help Taiwan and Taiwanese citizens themselves build that internal resilience that would be necessary in the case of some kind of cross-state contingency.
Secretary Blinken recently said that the United States needs to establish a framework of peaceful coexistence with China in the face of heightened rivalry. Let's look at his testimony before the Foreign Relations Committee.
China's not going away. We're not going away. So, in the first instance, we have to find a way to coexist and coexist peacefully. I think it's evident not only in what we're saying, but also in what we're doing, that we are there for Taiwan. Under the Taiwan Relations Act, we've had a long-standing policy of making sure that we could do what's necessary to help Taiwan defend itself.
Professor Ding, after listening to the remarks by Secretary Blinken, do you think that it is accurate to characterize the present relations between the U.S. and China, as mentioned by Blinken, as akin to navigating a political tightrope?
Yeah, basically right. We know that since President Trump era, the U.S.-China relation deteriorated. and enter the Biden era, President Biden era. Some people, including China, expect, President Biden as a kind of Democrat might change the course of President Trump, might improve the relation, because this is Democrats the tradition, but unfortunately, and the surprise to Beijing's expectation, we can say probably President Biden doubled down this kind of a pressure and the competition. President Biden, bring back all the so-called alliance partners, and make tremendous investment in domestic economies, and provide the tremendous help for Taiwan. So we can see, the President Biden, and in the name of so-called strategic competition, China really kind of a surprise to see, President Biden took such a kind of approach. So the U.S.-China relation really, no doubt, is deteriorated rapidly and substantially. But again, we should not forget, when President Biden launched the so-called strategic competition, there's one element that President Biden always stick, that is the so-called guardrail. Although we are compete with China, but we also want to maintain a channel of communication, or kind of maintain a stable relation, so the relation will not be escalated into a real conflict or real wars. So I would say there's no doubt, President Biden and or Secretary Blinken is really walking a tightrope, because from Beijing's perspective, they don't believe and they don't trust United States, and they don't believe the idea of so-called the guardrail, and they don't believe the so-called channel of communication. So on the one hand, we see the President Biden with tremendous effort try to build some kind of channel of communication, but Beijing really resists at the beginning, totally resists. But now seems Beijing realized. So Beijing also made a little bit of compromise, and welcome Secretary Blinken to visit the Beijing and to talk with the counterparts and meet with President Xi Jinping, so on and so forth. So basically, the relationship, I would say, has been stabilized somewhat. It will not spiral down further and further at this stage. But again, basically, it's really walking a very tight rope. Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah.
Well, just a quick add-on. I think China openly denounced the concept of the guardrail, as Professor Ding just pointed out, and also sort of play down the role or importance of the communications on its face. But I don't think China meant it. I think China realized and understood the importance of building up the guardrails and continue the face-to-face communications between Washington and Beijing. China just does not openly admit that. But now you see, Secretary Blinken's visit and Secretary Yellen's visit and so on and so forth. And I think both sides are working towards the possibilities of Biden meeting with Xi in San Francisco later this year. Now, I think to us, I think there is an important element here. That the United States State Department has openly mentioned repeatedly that the issue over Taiwan Strait is not in the context of the escalated and intense U.S.-China strategic competition. In other words, the issue over Taiwan Strait, or the Taiwan issue, has its own destiny and has its own purposes. It's not a reflection of the deteriorating U.S.-China relationship, or it's not and should not be read in the context of the U.S.-China competitive relationship. To us, there is an element in that because, we're fighting for our own existence and facing the fierce aggression from China. if this is what the U.S. stands for, U.S.-China strategic competition is one thing, continuous support of Taiwan to fight for its own destiny, including rule of law, way of life, democracy, and where we stand for. And that is regardless of the relationship up and down between the United States and China, which I think is very important to us.
So, Professor Ding, you just mentioned that Secretary Blinken met with Xi Jinping in Beijing. It seems that relations are getting better, but then the arms sales from the U.S. to Taiwan happens at this moment. Do you think that this will create another impasse?
Well, I guess the U.S.-China has so we call a structural impasse there. But the both sides also realize that they have to work together on certain issue, So in order to at least to maintain the stability, not to escalate the whole tension. So I guess the tension will continue to be there, but on the other hand, the both sides have to somewhat to make work hard to
find a way to work together.
Yeah, to try to find a way, like it or not, it's another issue, but they have to, to live together and because this is a small world, right? So
they have to find a way to coexist.
Yeah.
Right.
I think there are some issues that can change the dynamics. One is North Korea. And another bigger one, even bigger one, is what happened in Ukraine. The latest development of Russia. I mean, both were either one of which might change in dynamics of the U.S.-China relationship going forward.
Let's analyze a report from the New York Times. President Biden's objective is to enhance the strained relationship between the United States and China. Numerous polls suggest that negative sentiments towards China have been progressively growing among Americans between 2014 and 2023, paralleling Americans' perception of the Soviet Union from 1944 to 1947. So, Stephen, could the U.S. government face public opposition when they try to mend relationship with China?
Well, I think if you see the public opinions of the United States as we speak, there is a very strong sentiment or antagonism against or towards China. In the United States as a democracy, or in any democracy, the politicians have to react and respond to the public opinion. Now, that's exactly why you can see that for the congressional leaders on the Hill, there are very strong voices against China, or putting more and more restrictions, not just on the technology developments and export controls, but also on other aspects of the investment or to a certain extent trade with China. And that seems to be the case, and that will not change in the foreseeable future. This comes hand in hand with the fact that the whole atmosphere in the United States basically denounced the importance of the conventional trade pacts, which is really focusing on the reduction of the tariff and the opening up the market, which is market access. Now, two hand in hand will cause a situation where the U.S.-China competition looks very much like a rivalry. Although the official position of Washington has always been that China is not an enemy, is not a rivalry, it's just a strategic competitor, but it looks very much like an enemy or a rivalry situation. This will not change regardless of the outcome of the next general election, which comes in November next year. So in reactions to that, and because of the strength and the emphasis of the positions of strength of Washington, other countries will do hand in hand in very similar situations. So that's exactly what you can see in Japan, in South Korea. Well, Australia, there's some change in dynamics, but pretty much in the same track. And we're part of them. were part of it. In the United Kingdom, to a certain extent, partially Europe. And then all in all, this has partially contributed to the fact that China is not, the way it is, the old China. China under Xi Jinping's third term is very, very different, both in terms of the governance and its control over its people, and its handling of the social issues and the economic and financial issues, and also external relationship, the internationally with other countries, with other big powers, and how China handles the relationship with Russia, how China deal with the issue in the Middle East, and so on and so forth. Not to say that the issues in our neighbors, which is Indo-Pacific, South China Sea, is China Sea and Taiwan Strait. So I think there's a two-way street on the dynamic relationship, and that China should take the responsibility of the most recent changes in reactions that consequentially caused the change in dynamics of the United States and Western world, and also the cross-strait relationship.
Very well said. A delegation of 9 members from the U.S. House Armed Services Committee, led by Chairman Mike Rogers, visited Taiwan. President Tsai Ing-wen expressed gratitude to the legislator for their support in the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA. This year, the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee passed the 2024 fiscal year NDAA, which aims to establish comprehensive training, consultation, and capacity building programs for the Taiwanese military and expand cybersecurity cooperation between the United States and Taiwan. Professor Su, so what are the benefits of this kind of new training that involves the U.S. Army in helping Taiwan's military training?
I see there will be a lot of benefits. Previously, this kind of mutual training, or the training from the United States to help Taiwan to strengthen its military capacity, is actually not a very big new thing. We know that something's going on, but there's nothing like appear on the taible. But recently, I think one difference is made is that the U.S. government and the Taiwanese government made it more and more clear and apparent that we are trying very hard to cooperate with each other in train both armies, or receive the training from the United States to help Taiwan to develop its capacity for self-defense. So that is a big difference, and but there is also some challenges ahead. So for example, while we are happy to see this happen, we also need to evaluate, how efficient or how quickly that we can actually develop the capacity that we need to really, counter the potential threats from China. So I can imagine that something is definitely going on that between these two governments trying to understand, okay, what we should work on, what we should improve. So for example, some kind of, I don't know, maybe not necessarily infrastructure, but a more substantive aspect of training. So for example, we might need to send more military officials to the United States for training, or we also need to work on very hard to provide necessary defense infrastructure for the mutual military cooperation in the future. So I think overall I am pretty optimistic about this, the future U.S. Army involvement in Taiwanese military training.
And it also shows that the U.S. and Taiwan are working closely together on the military training. So Professor Ding, what are the key differences between the U.S. and Taiwan when it comes to military training?
Well, I guess we have to confess that, since 1970s, when Taiwan under ROC government changed the so-called military strategy from so-called recovering of mainland China to so-called the purely defense, so on and so forth. We have been peace for 40 years. And peace is good, frankly speaking. Nobody wants war. But one consequence of this kind of peace is that our training, frankly speaking, has not been rigorous, frankly speaking. This is one factor. Another factor is that since 1972, when we left the United Nations, we have been quite, diplomatically speaking, we have been quite isolated. Now, with this kind of isolation, we are not able to participate kind of international military-related training. For instance, Pacific RIMPAC training, this kind of military training. And we could not have so-called joint military training with, for instance, United States or other allied members. So overall, I would say in the past 40 years, we did enjoy our peace, but as a kind of a consequence is that our training has been less rigorous than before, frankly speaking. So with this kind of training assistance provided by the United States, then we can rebuild our, this kind of training program. And we should not forget that since the collapse of the Soviet Union, United States continue to get involved in the different military operations, different parts of the world.
Around the world.
Yeah, around the world. So they have a wide range experience, for the real experience and the war fighting experience. For instance, how to fight the mountain war, how to fight the traditional the land war, so on and so forth.
What about the island defense operations? Because Taiwan is an island, do you think that the U.S. is also capable of that?
Yeah, this is important. This is an item that I would say U.S. start to to strengthen the resources and the emphasis, because we all know in the Iraqi war is a land war, right? In the Middle East, and it's all land warfare, along with so-called anti-guerrilla war or anti-terrorist warfare, right? So, but Taiwan is an island, so the type of warfare is completely different from what happened in the Middle East, in the Iraq. So gradually we see U.S. shift its emphasis and the priority from the Middle East to the Indo-Pacific region, broadly speaking, so-called Indo-Pacific region. And we do see U.S. Marine Force is gradually, update the military theory and the military training and the equipment, so on and so forth. And in the past 1 or 2 years, we see that they have military exercise in the region. So my point is that since the end of the so-called Cold War, U.S. continue to involve in different warfare and operation in the global wide. So with this kind of experience and their so-called facility, they really can help us, and rebuild our, the morale and how strengthen the rigorousness of our military training. So I guess those are the benefit for us. Yeah.
So Professor Ding and Professor Su both talk about the benefits of this kind of military training. Stephen, do you see any potential risk Taiwan could face by having this kind of joint military training with the U.S.?
Well, risks in terms of with the escalation, or I don't think, if the joint efforts, both in terms of the military training and then the lateral communications, will it's a reactionary, it's a way that react to the Chinese aggression. So one would argue that in order to better prepare for ourselves by joint exercises, by military joint trainings, it will continue to escalate the risks. But I don't think it's logical to put it that way, because China initiated this first, and then we have to react and respond and get ready and be prepared. So arguing that by preparing ourselves well, will further escalate China's attention to aggression, and I don't think it makes sense to me, and I don't think that's the case.
So talking about the importance of preparedness, now we know that warfare has been developing. Not only we have to focus on asymmetrical warfare, but also cyber attacks. So what's your view on how we can cooperate on cyber security cooperation?
Yeah, I would say, as far as I know, we have quite a comprehensive cooperation program with United States and other island members, because we all know that Taiwan is one of the country or place which have been on daily basis
a main target for cyber
targeted
attacks.
by cyber attack from Beijing, from China. So we accumulate tremendous data, and those data really is important. So with this kind of a joint program in cyber operations, so on and so forth, we share the data with the partners, so we can jointly to do the research, their mode, their type, so on and so forth, so that we can better prepare ourselves to react and for any kind of a cyber attack on our for instance infrastructure or so on and so forth. So I guess this kind of a comprehensive cooperation program is extremely important for our survivability and for our the resilience. Yeah.
Professor Su?
Yeah, I agree with Professor Dean about the fact that the Taiwanese government has been prepared for counter cyber attack in recent years, and but my point is that aside from this very important project for defending ourselves from cyber attack, we also need to find a way to raise the public awareness about how serious it is about this cyber attack, because on the daily basis we can see that this disinformation or misinformations,
fake news,
flooding everywhere, online and also in Facebook, etc. But it seems that not a lot of people are aware this kind of serious problem. So I think that from the side of the government, they really need to try very hard to promote this kind of communication to the public about the awareness of the cyber attack.
If you like our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.